Hey folks, how you doing? Dave McRae here. The date today is Wednesday, December the 30th, 2015. And this is a response video, I guess, or a follow-up video, maybe I should say, to the video that I posted last week entitled Star Wars The Force Awakens is Not Like A New Hope, which generated quite the response, let me tell you. Not necessarily on the video itself, although there were a few good responses there, but through personal emails to me. There were a few, I received probably about 15 or so. And there were some pretty nasty emails in there, calling me a fucking idiot, a douchebag, an asshole, I don't know what I'm talking about. All those, by the way, are not arguments. They're just attacks on character, you know, calling somebody, oh, you're a fucking idiot. Whether you disagree with them or not, that's not an argument. Calling somebody an idiot is not an argument. It's just an attack on their character. Anyway, just so you know. And then there was about 10% that actually agreed with me and saw that I was trying to say, or saw what I was trying to say. This is a follow-up video for all those of you out there who aren't quite getting what I'm trying to say and are not really understanding why The Force Awakens is not like A New Hope. And let me sort of get into a little more detail for you, okay? In my other video, I was talking about parallels, and that how parallels is very different from story narrative and plot and structure. And it is. The problem that I have with all of you out there who are writing blogs and editorials and saying that you hate the film or you don't like the film or because it was basically nothing but a rehash and a remake of A New Hope. The problem I have with you writing that or talking about it is your language, the language you're using. By definition, The Force Awakens is not a remake of A New Hope, which brings me to the difference, I wrote it down here so I wouldn't forget, the difference between a reboot and a remake. Now, as somebody who works in the film industry, I can tell you that these two words are generally tossed around interchangeably. Not a lot of people know the difference, although those of us in the industry should. A lot of people sort of, you know, is a reboot a remake? Is a remake a reboot? Can a remake also be a reboot? Can a reboot be a remake as well? You know, I mean, they're just kind of thrown around. This is what a remake is. And before I begin, if you remember that Comic-Con trailer, okay, or not trailer, but that behind-the-scenes Comic-Con video, I believe it was released at Comic-Con last year. It was about 3 minutes long or so, and it showed some behind-the-scenes of the making of The Force Awakens. And in the first minute, I think, but somewhere in there, Mark Hamill says, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says something like, you've been here before. I believe he begins by saying, practical sets, real locations. And then he says, you've been here before, but you don't know this story. And that's very true. And that was sort of the point I was trying to make in my other video. Now, let me explain. You have been here before, but you don't know the story. A remake, ladies and gentlemen, okay, is when you take the exact story, the exact plot, the exact characters, and you remake it today. Now, we can get into an argument and a debate of whether or not remakes should happen at all, or whether reboots should happen, or whether any film should be remade. That's a whole other video, and there's many different reasons why films get remade. They could get remade because we're more technologically advanced now, and we can tell the story a bit better with our special effects and all that kind of stuff. Or maybe the themes that ran in that film 30 years ago are really relevant today as well, and maybe even more so than they were back then, and they want to remake the movie because they feel that it will resonate with people a bit more, and yada, 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 yada. But that's a whole other video. The point is that you take the same characters, the same plot, the same story, and you retell it for a new audience. Now, obviously, it'll be different actors playing those roles, but it's the same story. It's the same movie. Maybe some differences. You know, maybe if person A lived in a house before, now they live in, an apartment or something. But it's the same name of that person. It's the same character. It's the same story, the same sequence of events and everything. The Force Awakens does not tell the same story. I'm not talking about parallels within the story. I'm talking about the story in and of itself. It's not the same story. It's not about Luke Skywalker living on a planet called Tatooine, meeting an old man named Obi-Wan Kenobi, the death of his aunt and uncle, leaving with Obi-Wan to he wants to be more and learn the ways of the Force. They meet Han Solo and Chewbacca. They try to rescue a princess and a Death Star. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, the story of Star Wars, right? A New Hope. That's not the story of The Force Awakens. Now, you can sit there and go, well, okay, but by definition, Star Wars The Force Awakens is not a remake of A New Hope. It is not. As Mark Hamill said, you've been here before, but you don't know this story. It's a different story. That was the point I was trying to make in my other video when I said that, yes, there are... Look, I wasn't arguing with you. There are parallels, there are echoes, mirrors, tips of the hat to A New Hope. Absolutely. And maybe for some of you, there were too much. For me, I got lost in it. There was enough there for me. I did not find myself thinking about A New Hope, as I mentioned in my other video, and I found myself enjoying it for what it really was. Now, where I will agree with you on is the end of Star Wars The Force Awakens. Look, I just bought a book called The Art of The Force Awakens, that beautiful book that came out a couple of weeks ago. And there are some beautiful concept art in there and drawings and paintings and ideas about what they were going to do or ideas they had for the film. Did you know? And if you didn't, now you will. I highly suggest, I highly suggest picking up this book. There was an idea in there that Star Killer Base was going to be sort of like inside of a volcano. One had it underwater. One had the base looking completely different and had like a whole thing. Like, it was just, the concept art is so cool and the ideas they had were so different than a typical Death Star that I wish they would have gone with that. And the reason why I agree with you on that is because that for me was probably the most similar to A New Hope. And I think it was for you too. And the reason I say that is because there is a general, generally speaking, when I read blogs or watch vlogs about people who are complaining about A New Hope, that seems to be the number one thing they focus on. And it usually comes first. Well, it's exactly like A New Hope, they got a Death Star and... That seems to be, they focus on the climax of the movie, which, don't get me wrong, is very important, of course. And yes, the climax with the X-Wings and the TIE Fighters and coming down to the Starkiller Base and the New Hope, and even Han Solo says, in the movie, okay, it's bigger, I agree with you on that. And as a fan, as a filmmaker, I would have preferred, I don't know why they chose to go that route, I'm not entirely sure. And to sit there and say, well, it's because J.J. Abrams is a fucking idiot. No, he's not a fucking idiot. That's not why they chose. There was obviously a creative reason. There was a specific reason why they chose to do it. That doesn't mean you're going to agree with it. But to call someone a fucking idiot or call, Disney, idiots, losers, fucking morons, which is stupid, that's not an argument, okay? Just keep that in mind. There was a specific reason why they did it. You may not agree with it, and that's fair, but there was a reason why they did it. I don't know what that reason was. I would have much preferred the ending to be a little less New Hope-ish. But that still doesn't mean that the story that surrounds it is a remake of A New Hope, because it's not. You may not like it, but it's still not a remake. Now, what is a reboot? Somebody told me not too long ago, a fellow filmmaker of mine said, Dave, he believes that the difference between a remake and a reboot is that films, standalone movies, can be remade, but series are usually rebooted. And I thought, that's pretty insightful. I don't think it's as black and white like that. I think there are variables involved, but that's an interesting way of looking at it. A reboot to me is... perfect example. Take Sam Raimi's Spider-Man from 2002. Okay, now they made a Spider-Man 2 in 2004, I believe, and a Spider-Man 3 in 2007 when it all went to hell. I didn't hate Spider-Man 3 as much as a lot of people did, but it certainly was no Spider-Man 2, which came out a couple years prior, or 3 years prior, I guess. Anyways, it all went to shit, right? And then in 2012, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was 2012, out comes The Amazing Spider-Man with a different actor playing Peter Parker. Okay, that doesn't mean it's a reboot, but, you know, we have a new Spider-Man and a new story. It is a remake, per se, but it's more of a reboot because it's not telling beat for beat, verbatim, the exact story that Sam Raimi's Spider-Man did. Okay? Now you can sit there and say, oh, okay, well, technically, this is what it's about. Okay? This is what it's about. We have to be very specific. When you are writing, okay, when you take to the internet and you start writing about things, you got to make sure you do your research, your cross-references, your facts, and if you're displaying an opinion on something, you have to make sure, do I know what the difference between a remake and a reboot is? Can I just say that Star Wars The Force Awakens is just a remake of A New Hope? Well, you can, as long as you're okay with being, by definition, wrong. I'm just saying that. The Amazing Spider-Man was a reboot of Spider-Man because The Amazing Spider-Man told a different story than Sam Raimi's Spider-Man did. It told a similar story in the sense of how he got his powers. I get that, being a high school student and all that kind of stuff. I get that. But that's how it was in the comic. So they followed that formula, but the villain was different. There was no Mary Jane. You know, it was a very different film. It was a reboot. It wasn't a remake beat for beat of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. So I kind of like that definition that you can remake standalone films, but series are usually rebooted. Folks, if anything, Star Wars The Force Awakens is a reboot, but it's not a reboot of A New Hope. The reason is because it's a continuing story. Okay, now, it may be similar to A New Hope in its parallels and nods and tips of the hat and all that kind of stuff, but because it's a continuing story, it's not a remake of A New Hope. Okay? I want you to look something up for me. For those of you who don't know, I want you to look up The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, okay? Look that up, and you will see that that theme is very much relevant and there to the original Star Wars trilogy and Luke's character arc over the 3 movies. Luke was on the hero's journey, and that theme is beginning to play out in The Force Awakens. And I believe more than anything, because thematically they were similar, you could have put Rey on a city planet where it's nothing but buildings and skyscrapers and stuff. And although it would have helped to get rid of that A New Hope Tatooine kind of vibe, I still believe you would have left the theater as long as everything else was the same, okay? The sequence of events, Poe putting something into BB, all that stuff, all those parallels are the same. You put her on a city planet and you still would have left the theater going, you know, there was something familiar about that. I just could, because the overall theme is beginning to sort of mirror another hero's journey. And for the most part, that's what Star Wars is about the hero's journey. Look it up by Joseph Campbell. I'm not going to get into it here because it would be like another hour video. Look it up, do your research, and you'll read it and you'll go, oh, okay, okay, interesting, if you don't know anything about it. So The Force Awakens is a reboot of the Star Wars franchise because the Star Wars franchise as a series had laid dormant for, you know, at least 10 years. Although if you talk to people like me, I've been waiting a long time. It's more like 32 years. But, you know, for all intents and purposes, 10 years, we didn't think there were going to be any more movies. That was it. It was dead. Star Wars was dead. And they've rebooted the franchise, but they're continuing the story. So by definition, it's not a remake of A New Hope, regardless of how many parallels and similarities there are. You can write and say, I didn't like Star Wars The Force Awakens because there were far too many parallels to A New Hope. Boom. I'm with you. No, I don't feel the same way, but I get it. I get it. Okay, fair enough. But to have a headline that says Star Wars The Force Awakens is nothing but a rehash and a remake of A New Hope, by definition, you're wrong. So you can't stop it. Stop it. It's not a remake of A New Hope. You take issue with the parallels, the similarities within the overall story. Remember, folks, okay, that this is a 3-act system. Star Wars, especially Star Wars, there's other trilogies that do this too, but especially Star Wars and the kind of story it's telling and has told. The second act out of a 3-act play is usually always your darkest act for our protagonists. Now, should episode 8 be less like The Empire Strikes Back than The Force Awakens is like A New Hope in terms of nods and parallels? Yes, it should be. It should be. But thematically, I can almost guarantee you it's going to be the same. The bad guys are going to win. Yeah, I guarantee you it. Kylo Ren is going to come back with a vengeance because he's going to complete his training. He's going to become better and badder, if I could use that word, because he's also murdered his father. He had to do that to be one step closer to the dark side of the Force, or to feel complete. Yeah, I mean, thematically, Episode 8 should be very similar to The Empire Strikes Back. You have to understand the 3-act system. And then episode 9 is the resolution and the yay, all that kind of stuff, right? So, yeah, just be prepared for that. I do believe that J.J. Abrams and Disney and company made The Force Awakens the way they did because they had to get Star Wars back on track. You may not agree with it, but you know as well as I do, regardless of what you think of The Force Awakens, you are probably somebody that despises the prequels, okay? And if you're not, the vast majority did. If they did a completely different Star Wars movie, the risk was too high. So they took a risk in killing Han Solo, which was the right thing to do. They had to do that. Not because they needed to kill him and because Han Solo, that Harrison Ford didn't like Han Solo. No. For the story, it was integral because of Kylo Ren's character arc. Okay? And for those of you who don't recognize that, you need to think about this. Go watch my other video about why it had to happen. They played it safe. They played it safe. They did take a risk in killing Han. Great. But they needed to steer the ship back on track. So they did. They did exactly what J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan said they were going to do. We're making this for the fans. And that's what they did. But to me, at least, it's different enough that it stands on its own and it lays the foundation for something really great with episode 8. You may not agree with it, but it is not a remake of of A New Hope. It's not. I'll leave you with this. Remember what Mark Hamill said in the Comic-Con behind the scenes video. You've been here before, but you don't know this story. My name's Dave McRae. Peace.